How similar are Japanese and Korean? Hold on. Okay, now we can start. Hello everyone, welcome to the Langfocus channel, and my name is Paul. How similar are Japanese and Korean? That is the question of the day. Japan and Korea are geographically very close to each other, and at first glance they look like similar countries with similar cultures in a way, but just how similar are the Japanese and Korean languages? Well, the short answer is they're closer to each other than they are to any other languages, and they are remarkably similar in some ways, but in other ways they're also very different, and they are certainly not mutually intelligible. Disclaimer, I don't speak very much Korean, but I do speak Japanese and I am aware of the differences and similarities between them. Let's look at the similarities in terms of grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and the writing systems. When it comes to syntax and grammar, Japanese and Korean are very similar. Japanese and Korean sentences can often be translated word by word, with each word in one sentence having an equivalent in the other. Let's look at a couple of Korean and Japanese sentences side by side and we can see the similarities. Again, I don't really speak much Korean, so if my pronunciation is terrible, Koreans please forgive me. In English, I am a student. In Korean, 나는 학생이다. In Japanese, watashi wa gakusei desu. You can see that these sentences are translatable word by word, that each word in the first sentence has an equivalent in the second sentence in the exact same position, so they are directly translatable. One thing I want to point out is the topic marker. That's the second word in each of these sentences. The topic marker is something that's kind of unique to Japanese and Korean. A topic marker points out the topic of a sentence that's different from the grammatical subject. It's the overarching focus or topic of the sentence. Another thing I want to point out is the last word in each sentence. In Korean it's ida, and in Japanese it's desu. In both cases that's like a copula, like the word is in English. So in both Japanese and Korean, this is a standalone word that is placed usually at the end of the sentence. In Korean, 나는 물을 마신다. In Japanese, watashi wa mizu wo nomimasu. So again, we see that the topic marker is the second word in each sentence. But a more important thing that I want to point out here is the SOV word order. That means subject, object, verb. So we can see that the subject is watashi, or it's na in Korean, and then we have the object next. So the object is water. In Korean, it's 물, and in Japanese, it's mizu. And then we have the verb at the end. So in Korean, masinda, and in Japanese, nomimasu. But before the verb, there is an interesting little word that we don't have in English, and that is an object marker. So that's another unique thing that we find in both Japanese and Korean, used in exactly the same way, in exactly the same position in the sentence. Even though the grammar and sentence structure of the two languages is remarkably similar, the vocabulary is remarkably different. If a Japanese speaker heard Korean without any prior exposure, they probably wouldn't understand any of the words at all, or maybe just a word here and there. But that doesn't mean that those words aren't related. Korean and Japanese both inherited a large number of loan words from Chinese. Approximately 60% of the vocabulary in either language comes from Chinese. If there are so many Chinese loan words in both languages, then why are they not mutually comprehensible? Well, it's important to note that for both languages, in daily conversation, in informal speech, the Chinese loan words are not used nearly as much as they are in writing. Also, the Chinese loanwords are different in either language. They entered the languages in the form of Chinese characters, but the pronunciation of those characters became adapted to fit the phonological system of either language. So let's look at some examples. The first example is just the name of those Chinese characters themselves. In Chinese, hanzi. In Korean, hanja. In Japanese, kanji. So you can see that the pronunciation started as hanzi, but it diverged and became different in Korean and Japanese, even though it's the same two characters. Some other examples. In Korean, sachin. In Japanese, shashin, photograph. The word for singer. In Korean, kasu. In Japanese, kashu. The word for promise. In Korean, yakso. In Japanese, yakusoku. Those examples sound quite similar, but sometimes they sound really quite different. But if we look at the Romanized words, sometimes we can see the similarities. This is the word for telephone. In Korean, chonhwa. In Japanese, denwa. So those come from the same characters, but again, they're rendered differently in pronunciation. The next word is school. In Korean, 학교. in Japanese, gakko. Another example is university, in Korean, daehak, in Japanese, daigaku. Tofu, in Korean, tubu, in Japanese, tofu. The word for spa or hot spring, in Korean, onchon, in Japanese, onsen. So you can see that sometimes the words are clearly related, but when you're listening to the language being spoken, you probably wouldn't be able to catch those words. Chinese loanwords aside, there are also some Japanese loanwords that have entered the Korean language. The word for cheers when you're having a drink, in Korean, gongpei, in Japanese, kampai. The Japanese word for bag. In Korean, it's kabang. In Japanese, it's kaban. There are also a lot of words that are native to both Korean and Japanese that might be related to each other. The word for island, in Korean, som. In Japanese, shima. The word for village, in Korean, maul. In Japanese, mura. There are a lot of words like that that I don't really think are connected, but linguists think might be connected. Interestingly though, some of the grammatical particles have very similar pronunciations in the two languages. For example, the word for above, in Korean, wiye. In Japanese, ue. Question particle, ka, in Korean, with a double consonant, a double ka, and in Japanese it's ka. The word for to or towards, in Korean it's e, and in Japanese it's e. The subject marker, so this is different from the topic marker. The subject marker is, in Korean, ga or i. In Japanese, it's just ga. So basically, Korean and Japanese have a lot of vocabulary that are related but not the same. It's probably enough to help you remember that word if you study it, but not necessarily enough to pick up that word when you're hearing it in conversation. And of course, most of the spoken vocabulary seems to be unrelated, or they're words that have very ancient connections to each other. Now let's look at the different pronunciation of the two languages. In some ways they're similar. The basic phonetic sounds of the two languages are quite similar, but the way those phonetic sounds are arranged to create syllables is different in the two languages. In Japanese, basically every syllable has to end in a vowel. You cannot have a word that ends in a solid consonant like cut. It has to be something like katto with a vowel added to the end. But in Korean, you can have a consonant at the end of a syllable. That's why in one of the words that we compared before, the word for promise, in Japanese it's yakusoku. You need those vowels after the consonants. But in Korean, it's yakusok. Another difference is that in Japanese, the pronunciation of consonants doesn't change depending on their position in the word. They just are always the same. But in Korean, there are consonants that can change depending on whether they're at the beginning of the word, in the middle of the word, or at the end of the word. Korean also has a greater variety of vowels and diphthongs. So in general, Korean pronunciation is just more complex than Japanese pronunciation. One thing that is completely different between the two languages is their writing systems. Japanese is written using a combination of Chinese characters and two syllabaries. Those syllabaries consist of characters that represent entire syllables rather than just individual phonetic sounds. The Japanese writing system is quite complex, and since you need to learn more than 2,000 kanji to be able to read at an adult level, it can take quite a lot of time and effort to learn. Korean, on the other hand, is written in the Hangul alphabet, which is one of the simplest writing systems in the world. Korean used to use hanja, or Chinese characters, in the same way that Japanese uses kanji in combination with hiragana and katakana. But they've done away with that. Now they're just using the simplified writing system of Hangul. The Hangul alphabet consists of individual phonetic symbols that are arranged together to create syllables. In this example for hanja, this is the sound for ha, like an H. This is the sound for a. This is the sound for n, like an N. This is the sound for j, or ch. And this is a. So whereas Japanese requires you to learn 92 syllabary symbols and 2,000 kanji, in Korean you just have to learn 24 phonetic symbols, and you can use those to represent any new words that you learn. So to summarize, Korean and Japanese are very similar in terms of sentence structure and grammar, and they both have a large number of Chinese loanwords, but the native vocabularies are quite different, as is the pronunciation, which makes these two languages mutually unintelligible. On top of that, the two writing systems are now completely different, with the new modern Korean system completely avoiding Chinese characters these days. My feeling is that Japanese and Korean did originate from the same language a very long time ago, but they've been diverging for a long time, perhaps about 2,000 years, so that now they're very different, even though structurally they're quite similar. Thank you for watching the Langfocus channel. Leave your comments down below, especially if you have studied Japanese or Korean, and you can let us know about some other similarities or differences that you have discovered. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.